Greetings, my name is Ron Sabi. I'm president of the Minnehaha County Historical Society, and I welcome you to our evening's History Talk. Tonight we're going to be talking about the history of ballooning presented by Orvin Olivier and sponsored by Ravens Industries. These are interesting times. With the coronavirus, we were in a dilemma as to whether we will do a face-to-face meeting or not. And as you can tell, the courthouse tower is behind me, and we are certainly not in the courtroom or in the law library. We decided that what we'll do is a virtual history talk, and that's what we're doing tonight. And I want to take this opportunity to thank Rick Lindbergh for being able to bring to us the technology, talent, and know-how to make this happen. However, sometimes when we put our faith and trust into a person, and that person is the only one that's able to do the job, and due to some scheduling problems, we were not able to bring to you last month's program, so therefore the program with Will Prines will be rescheduled for December. And that will be an opportunity for you to pick up on that program. I want to bring to your attention that the January program is going to be on the Spanish flu, presented to us by Jim Carlson, our past president, and he gave this presentation to the Center of Western Studies, I believe a year or 2 years ago, and is timely for today. And that is being sponsored by FYI Dakota. We also have a couple of programs that are ready to go, but those are going to be face-to-face programs, and we're taking it a month at a time to see how we're working out. So this virtual History Talk program being presented to you is an opportunity for us to be able to reach to all of our members and guests. However, we're limited because we need to have your email address to make this work. So I encourage you. We have about 75, maybe 80% of our membership's email addresses. If you happen to know somebody that's a member and they're wondering what's happening with the History Talk, they're probably not getting it because we don't have their email address. If you have friends, relatives, neighbors that are interested in the Historical Society and our History Talks, let them know that all they need to do is give us their email address and we will send them an invitation. To send us an email address, send it to info@minnehahahistory.org. Another thing that you can do is you can forward the email that we send to you as an invitation to your friends and family members and neighbors, so they can be able to take in the program at their convenience also. I want to bring to your attention that we had a annual business meeting last October. I'm not going to go through all the things that we did, but I do want to bring to your attention that there was a revision of the bylaws that was put together by a bylaw committee, passed through the advisory board, and presented to the board and passed by the membership. And basically there was about a dozen changes, but most of them are just minor, kind of cleaning up the language and bringing it up to date. The major change is the membership dues. In the past, our membership was due on our anniversary month. That has been changed to the month of January for everybody. This is a way to better serve you as members, to keep track of our membership and give notices as to renewals in the month of January. We do not have a staff, paid staff or anything to keep track of our membership. So this is an easy way for us to be able to maintain the membership, but also January is the kickoff of our fiscal year. And so it would be nice to know what kind of funds we have available to be able to work with during the year. So this is something that I want to encourage you. If your membership has been due or past due, use January as a month to catch up, and we'll be sending out notices in February as to people's membership status. Well, that brings us to the program tonight. And I just want to, it's the history of ballooning. And when I think of history of ballooning, it brings me back to when I was 19. I joined the JCs, and one of the first events that I worked at was a ballooning event. And it was so fascinating to look up in the sky and see all these balloons take off and just float through the air. And it was such a colorful thing. History of ballooning is part of Sioux Falls and South Dakota. And so it is important for us to know the value of ballooning. Tonight, Rick Lindbergh will be introducing to you our speaker for tonight, Orvin Olivier.
Good evening. My name is Rick Lindbergh, and I'll be your host for this evening's History Talk. I'm happy to say our speaker this evening is Orvin Olivier, and his topic will be South Dakota and Sioux Falls' rich history in ballooning. Before I turn this over to Orvin, I'd like to remind you all that on the right of your screen, you'll see a chat box, and you're certainly welcome to interact with each other. And if you have a question for Orv, please put it in there. We'll try to take those questions as we go along. At this time, it's my pleasure to introduce to all of you, Orvin Olivier.
Well, good evening, everybody. I'm coming to you from warm and sunny Surprise, Arizona. But I'm happy to be with you. And I will start out by just giving you a little bit of my ballooning background. How I got started in ballooning is I worked at Raven Industries during the 1970s. And all ballooning in the modern hot air ballooning in the world started at Raven Industries. I'd been flying balloons for 46 years. I can hardly imagine that, but I did. I've been very involved in the national level and sometimes international level. I'm a past vice president of the Balloon Federation of America. The Balloon Federation of America is our controlling ballooning organization in the United States. I was their insurance chair for 18 years. I am their national awards chair, which I do both national and some international stuff. I started and am the chair of the United States Ballooning Hall of Fame. I've flown balloons in a number of countries, and a lot of times I'm flying special shaped balloons. If you've seen some weird looking balloons that look like all kinds of strange things, I've flown quite a few of those. I'm a commercial and instructor rated pilot. I'm the official for the National Aeronautics Association for many world record attempts. And ironically, we just had one attempt that we were working on that we did Monday, but it was not successful. That was going to be a distance attempt, and the person took off in North Dakota, and he landed near Louisville, Kentucky. Or actually landed by Indianapolis, but it was short of his goal. I do a lot of balloon history for different organizations, including the Balloon Federation of America and national conventions. I've been a speaker at many safety seminars for aviation safety seminars for balloons and national conventions. Some of the country, or not all the countries I've flown in, I've flown in Canada quite a few times to the point where I was required to get a Canadian pilot's license. I've flown in Mexico 4 times, including one time at Mexico City for the president of Mexico. I've flown in the Netherlands 5 times. When I say 4 times, 5 times, I'm not talking about flights. I'm talking about events where we've flown, numerous flights each event. I've flown in Belgium twice, Japan, China, Inner Mongolia. Now there was an adventure. Last summer I flew in Finland at the Arctic Circle, and being they have daylight 24 hours a day at that time, we were launching at 11:30, quarter to 12 at night. And that was a real adventure considering at the Arctic Circle it's very heavily forested or very big water. So that's my ballooning bio. So getting into today's program, South Dakota's and Sioux Falls' rich history in ballooning. And the question is, Why South Dakota? Why does South Dakota have a rich history in ballooning? Well, here's three major reasons. One is the stratobowl in the Black Hills. Now, I don't know how many people are aware of the stratobowl, but the stratobowl has to do with a lot of history, high altitude flights in the 30s. And of course, it wasn't named a stratobowl at that point, but the name became about because of all the attempts that were going out of there. Raven Industries. Raven was the largest balloon manufacturer in the world until they quit making balloons. And all modern hot air ballooning, as we know it today, started at Raven Industries. I've flown, like I said, I've flown balloons all over the world. And when I do that, and you see all the balloons flying, you think it all started in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. And the third reason is a gentleman named Ed Yost. And Ed was one of the four founders of Raven Industries. And then he left probably in the late 60s, about 68 or so. He left and started his own company and stayed right here. So going to the Stratobowl, this is the place for the pre-astronauts. The Stratobowl, South Dakota is where the United States early space pioneers first started to explore in a near space environment. This is a picture of the Stratobowl taken from the North Rim, but the Stratobowl is near Rockerville, South Dakota, but it's not marked. You'd never know it's there. It's a little gravel road going down. It's actually private property at the bottom, but it's a 400-foot depression in the ground, and it has trees all the way up the sides, but it affords very, very good wind protection for these high altitude balloons that need hours and hours to inflate and no wind. So this is the grass area you see in the bottom there is about 5 acres. It's probably the nicest place in the United States to launch these type of balloons. And for the history of it, the first flight took off on July 28th, 1934. And you can see a picture of it there. This was a balloon that was built by the Goodyear Company, and it was for the United States Army and National Geographic. The two of them were paying for it and sponsored it. And they used hydrogen. The envelope, if you look at it, was a big, heavy cotton and rubberized envelope. And it was, like I said, it was 3 million cubic feet in volume and extremely heavy. The balloon fabric weighed about 5,000 pounds. But that balloon launched and made it to 60,613 feet, which, going back to that was the highest altitude man had ever been off the face of the earth. And these balloons were not being flown to set altitude records. They were really scientific missions to explore the upper atmosphere. Unfortunately, at the 60,000 foot level, the balloon failed. And you can see a picture of it there coming down where the whole thing ripped open and 2 people aboard had to parachute out. So they came back the next year, 1935, November 11th, to do a second attempt. And this balloon was a little bit bigger, but still the same type of manufacturer, a big, heavy cloth, rubberized cloth balloon, weighed about 5,800 pounds now, 3,700,000 cubic feet. To give you an idea of the volume of that, our hot air balloons that we fly around Sioux Falls are about 55,000 to about 100,000 cubic feet in volume. And hydrogen and helium have a whole lot more lift than hot air does. So these are monster balloons. Now they switched from hydrogen to helium, and this balloon reached 72,395 feet. And again, another altitude record for the highest man had ever been off the face of the earth. Now, if you were to look at this picture, and you can kind of see in the background, you see tons of tents and a lot of activity. When these 2 attempts were done, these places became small villages of military. And they were out there for probably a month waiting for the right weather, getting all the equipment ready and everything else. But this was a small city here, both on the bottom and up on the rim where I showed you that original picture was taken. And this particular altitude record from 1935 stood for 21 years. So the highest man ever got off the face of the earth took off at the Stratobowl, South Dakota, and that record stood for 21 years. Here's a picture of the capsule at the bottom of the Stratobowl with the pilots are getting into it, getting ready to go. If you're to look at these up here, these are all what we call ballast, heavy bags of sand, lead shot, whatever. And they dump those things as they're flying. They continually drop weight to go higher and higher and higher, or to land it when they're coming down to slow their descent, they'll drop the weight. So that's what all these bags are, and there's more of them all the way around the balloon. And this is where the capsule is today. It's in the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum. So this was an extremely major event. And at the top of the Stratobowl on the north rim, where I took that original picture from, is this plaque up there talking about it. And this was, like I said, a major, major event. And here's the National Geographic magazine with a huge story in it, January 1936, about this flight. So now, if we were to fast forward 21 years, they're back at the Stratobowl again to do, to do more scientific flights. And if you look at the balloon here, you can see it now looks completely different. Where the old ones were solid white, heavy cloth fabric balloons, this one is now pretty much like the balloons are being made today. And this is a clear polyethylene product, and the thickness of it is about like a bread bag. So the balloon is a lot smaller now, 800,000 cubic feet versus the last one of 3,700,000. But because of its vast weight savings, it was still able to, able to get up to 76,000 and break another altitude record. And then then we went to Stratolab 4. There was 2 and 3, but they weren't flown in South Dakota. They were flown in different areas. But now we're to Stratolab 4. This took place in 1959. And now we went from 800,000 cubic feet to 2 million cubic feet. And this balloon made it to 82,000. Again, altitude record for man. So, and here is the capsule getting ready to go, and the 2 pilots getting ready to fly it. But all these altitude records took place here. And now at the top of the north rim of the Stratobowl is right over the edge here, going down 400 feet. Ed Yost put up these dedication to it. So if you were to get up there, it's on government land, and you can't drive to it, you have to walk back to it. But these monuments are back there right now. Very, very impressive, talking about the different flights out of there. And then Joe Kittinger, I don't know how many people recognize his name, but Joe is a very, very famous pilot, balloonist, and his stuff is going to come up in a little bit, but he did a really famous quote, or I don't know if it's famous, but meaningful quote, and it said, "Little did we know that in a few years, man would fly in space, and then in a few more years after, walk on the moon." But it all started here in the Stratobowl of South Dakota. And at the dedication, here's 2 prominent people. This is Ed Yost, and this is Jim Winker. Many of you might have known Jim. Jim is a real historian as well. Jim died a few years back as well, but Jim was a vice president of Raven Industries for many years, and he was in charge of the balloon division. So, And then here is a magazine from the Sioux Falls Chamber of Commerce back in 1956. And that was the year Raven came to Sioux Falls and started. And it talks about Sioux Falls being the scientific research balloon capital of the world. Raven Industries explores the spaces. So Raven, ironically, I'll go back to Raven, came to Sioux Falls in 1956. But at that point in time, there were 4 balloon manufacturers, scientific high altitude balloon manufacturers in the world. And they were all located between Sioux Falls, South Dakota, and Minneapolis. So there was Sheldon Industries just south of Minneapolis, Winds and Research in St. Paul. And then the one that was really interesting is General Mills. And you think, General Mills, out of Minneapolis. But General Mills had a mechanical division that did stuff for the government. I don't know if any of you ever heard of the Elvin submarine, but back in its day, the Elvin submarine was the first submersible to reach the deepest depths of the ocean. And they were built by General Mills. General Mills built the Elvin submarine. But General Mills also had a high altitude helium balloon division. And that is where Raven Industries came from. 4 of the primary people in that division left and came to Sioux Falls and started Raven Industries. And then a few years later, a few prominent people like Jim Winker, Russ Pohl, a few other ones, if you recognize those names, also followed suit, coming from General Mills to Sioux Falls to join Raven. So that takes me out of the scientific ballooning history. And now we get into the more modern day history of hot air balloons. And as I've said several times now, Sioux Falls is the worldwide home of the modern hot air balloon, and also the worldwide home of the sport of hot air ballooning. And ballooning is a big sport all over the world. Every 2 years, there's a world championships. This composite picture, I think, is really neat. The first part of the picture here is a picture of their very, very first flight. And that's Ed Yost sitting on a little chair. And he actually did this flight in Bruning, Nebraska. He went to Bruning because there was a deserted Air Force base there with lots of open spaces. And for their first flight, they wanted a space with a lot of open spaces, no power lines or anything else. So they went to Bruning. But and this picture would be from Albuquerque, which holds the largest balloon festival in the world. And here's a monument about Sioux Falls being the birthplace of the modern hot air balloon. And this is at the entrance to Top Hill Park. So if you're in the lower parking lot and you're going to walk towards the ice skating rink or the warming house there, this monument is right there. And it was put up by the Sioux Falls Ballooning Association and with some financial assistance from Raven Industries.
Orv, can you hear me?
Go ahead.
Yeah, I got a question on Facebook the other day. You mentioned Albuquerque there, and it was from a niece of mine, and she lives down there, and she was wondering if you had been down there and what you knew about that.
I'm not getting any audio through if somebody's trying to say something to me. So, okay. This first flight took place, like I said, on October 22nd, 1960. Ed Yost was the pilot, but Raven Industries was the ones that built it and funded it for the most part. This first flight here, like I said, took place at Bruning, Nebraska. It wasn't very successful. It flew about 45 minutes, but barely could keep any altitude at all. But then they came back 3 weeks later, made a bunch of modifications to the balloon, and did their second flight at the Stratobowl. And this is considered really the very first really successful flight of the hot air balloon. They flew it for 2.5 hours, took it up to 9,000 feet, sitting on this little chair, and found it to be relatively controllable by their standards, not by our standards today, but it was really a successful flight. And if you look at this balloon here, you'll see this a little bit better other places, but it says ONR, U.S. Navy. ONR stands for Office of Naval Research, and then the Navy. And they're the ones that sponsored the building this first balloon, doing the research and stuff on it, thinking that maybe it could be used to fly people out from behind the Iron Curtain, airplane pilots, whatever, but obviously that would not be very practical. Here's a picture of a gentleman from Sioux Falls named Dick Koiser. And Dick did a lot with Ed Yost. And here they got the balloon, what we call a tether, but tied down on a rope, doing some experimenting with it. This picture's in the Hippodome in St. Paul, Minnesota. And these tanks here, they were using for fuel tanks. These are actually oxygen tanks off a World War II B-29 bomber. And that's what they were using for propane tanks. And here's what the basket looked like, chair. Again, here are the oxygen tanks. And their burner here, to me, is amazingly small. It put out about 1 million BTUs of heat. To put that in comparison, my hot air balloons have 2 burners, and each burner is capable of 16 million BTUs, or 32 million BTUs combined. And this one had about 1 million. And here's another picture of Dick Koiser getting ready to launch. That's by Sioux Falls. The thing I find really amazing about this picture is, if you look at the burner, it's going wide open. But Dick's sitting here in the chair, just pretty casual looking, doing a few things, getting ready. If we did that with our balloons today and turned the burner on wide open, that thing would be out of there. It'd be nobody could hold on to us and hang us down. So completely different. So here's a picture of either Ed Yost or Dick Koiser flying it over Sioux Falls. And you can kind of see the words a little bit better again. And I've always assumed that the first flight was 1960. So this would have been 1961 or so. But I assume these roads down here is probably Interstate 90. That'd be my guess. So from the chair, here's a second generation, what they're using for a gondola. And here is Ed Yost again. And this gentleman was named Jerry Melcha. And they lived on East Madison outside of Sioux Falls. And Jerry worked with Dick Koiser and Ed Yost extensively. But this board here is a rock sled that farmers used. And it was curved so they could pull it behind a tractor and throw rocks on it to get them out of their field and then slide along. And this is what they used for some flights following it. And here's some other advancements to the gondola. This one's all aluminum. Raven actually, when in the 70s, still had a basket somewhat similar to this. Very lightweight, very strong, very hard on your body when you came in for a fast landing. And here's Ed Yost again, and here's Russ Pohl. This picture here just scares me to even look at it. Here they got a flat board, no sides, just some cloth. I'm sorry about keep losing that picture all the time. And these guys are standing up, hanging on to what? There's nothing there, nothing around them, and they're flying this thing. Crazy. The things they did back then are just crazy by our standards. But now the hot air balloon comes to age, and here's how it came to age. Up until 1963, the hot air balloon was pretty much unknown. There are a few people that had a couple now, but there's only a few in the whole world. But Raven struck a deal with some people in England to do a flight over the English Channel, which had never been done before in a hot air balloon. It had been done in gas balloons back in the 1700s, 1800s, but never a hot air balloon, because the hot air balloon was virtually unknown at this point yet. And it was this flight, which was successful, that brought the attention of the hot air balloon to the entire world. They had news coverage all over the world about this flight. So it's the first crossing of an English Channel by a hot air balloon, April 13, 1963. And here is sitting in front of the Nabisco building, which is now Raven Industries' home office. Ed Yost was the pilot, and another person that came along that lived in Sioux Falls for a short while, and some people involved in Sioux Falls historical, you might remember, Don Picard. And the Picard family has a huge history in high altitude balloons going way back. And Don was their son, certainly an interesting person. And actually, he just died a few months ago. But here they are in Cardigan, England, doing a demonstration of the balloon for the press. This is in an old blimp hangar, Russ Pohl, Ed Yost again, and you can see him sitting on this board. And this is actually how they went across the English Channel on this thing. So here they're getting ready to fly it. And there are two tanks, the board. This is their inflator fan. If any of you have ever been around hot air balloons being inflated, you've seen our fans. When I fly, I have two fans. One is a 9-horse and the other one's a 5-horse. And I actually got a couple of 9 horses by using both. This thing is just so tiny, I can't even imagine they could even get the thing inflated with it. That's what their equipment looked like back then. And here they're flying, and I'm guessing that they've made it across now. They're over France. And what happened when they took off? Weather forecasting wasn't nothing like it is today. And they took off at the English coast, and they went up, and they started going the wrong direction. And they started going back overland. So they just kept going, Ed, I used to say, just kept going higher and higher and higher. And he took this balloon up to 13,500 feet, sitting on that board with Don Picard with that little burner. They flew it for 3 hours, 17 minutes, and did make it across. And here's their landing in France. Ed Yost, Don Picard, and a whole lot of people. And the balloon came in for a sliding landing. And what stopped them, if you look real close, was a fence. So the basket's on one side of the fence, and then the whole envelope's on the other side of the fence. But a massive crowd of people, news coverage all over the world, all over the world. And these guys became international heroes because of this particular flight. And like I said, it's this flight that really brought the attention of the hot air balloon to the world. And from this point on, ballooning really took off. Here's a picture of the system, the one across the English Channel, and the original envelope in Tut Hill Park. And this picture was taken in the 1990s. But what happened is the envelope disappeared, and this lower end was in Malcolm Forbes Balloon Museum in France. Well, the envelope reappeared. I got my hands on it and took it out of the bag to see if it was the real thing. It turned out it was. I let Ed Yost know, and he came down and we inflated it, not this picture. And he got so excited about seeing this thing, because like I said, it was this flight that made him really world famous, that he wanted to know if we could get the lower end back from the Forbes Museum in France. So he gave me some contact names, and I started calling Forbes. And finally, after many months, this massive package arrived with this lower end on it. And it wasn't in very good condition. We had to really restore the whole thing. But we were taking it out for the first time. Ed, at this point, was living in New Mexico, and he came all the way down from New Mexico, and we inflated it, and Ed and I did some tethering in it. Here is something that's kind of interesting. Popular Mechanics, April 1963. You know, it says Popular Mechanics editor rides new hot air sport balloon. Great story, a total fabrication. He never did it. This was a complete a completely made up story, but a great article for ballooning. And then again, balloon cap of the world. This is a balloon cap of the world from the Sioux Falls Chamber of Commerce, August 1963. So it's just a few months after their famous flight. Okay, I talked about Joe Kittinger a little early, being very, very famous. So pay attention to this part of it. It gets important. I'm going to be a little test on it a little later on. But Joe Kittinger was an Air Force pilot and was involved in a lot of scientific stuff, pre-astronaut stuff. And in 1960, he set the world altitude parachute record, jumping from a scientific helium balloon made by Raven Industries, but he jumped from 102,800 feet. He broke the speed of sound in free fall and survived it. And this was a major, major event. But remember the dates, remember this name. And here's a book about him. This flight was actually done in New Mexico, but Raven made the balloon. But here's where the rest of it comes in. These two stories tie together. There was a gentleman named Nick Piantanida, and I had a lot of information on him, but Jim Carlson actually had some great information on it too. So Jim, thank you for getting that to me, and I got it all packaged to get back to you. But Nick wanted to break Joe Kittinger's parachute jump record, and he approached both Joe Kittinger and the U.S. Air Force about assistance to do this, and neither would have anything to do with him in any way, shape, or form. But he was very persistent, and he did manage to get his hands on, the equipment needed, being the pressure suits and systems. He got that directly from the manufacturers of it. They were making it for the military. It took a lot to do it, though. You had to get U.S. senators involved and all kinds of things. But his goal was to break Joe Kittinger's world parachute altitude record. And his first attempt was he bought a balloon from Winsen Research, which is in St. Paul, Minnesota, and launched from St. Paul. And the balloon failed at altitude. It was like 50,000 feet or something, but the balloon completely failed, and he had to parachute to the ground. So after that, he decided that Winsen was not the person he wanted to do business with, and came to Sioux Falls to Raven and wanted Raven to build the balloon for him, which Raven did. Not only did they build the balloon, but they took over the whole management of the flight and everything. So on a second attempt, he took this balloon up to 123,500 feet. But he couldn't exit the gondola. And the reason he couldn't get out of the gondola was the gondola carried his main oxygen system along, but once he got to altitude and was going to jump out, he had to disconnect from the main oxygen system. Then he had a little system they had on him that could provide oxygen on his jump down. He couldn't disconnect from it. It all froze up, and he had to come back down with the balloon. But certainly this is a world record altitude for a balloon. But to put it in perspective, at 100,000 feet of altitude, 99% of the atmosphere is below you. And he made it up to 123,000. But couldn't jump out, so decided to do attempt number 3 from Sioux Falls. And at this point, he got to 57,000 feet, had a complete oxygen failure, and Raven had to cut him down, and the whole capsule he was in parachuted to the ground. And I'll show you a little bit more about this. But here he is at the Sioux Falls Airport. Here he is in his capsule. Here's a balloon being inflated, and how they'd inflated is it fill a bubble, and this was like a wringer off an old style wash machine, and they just keep putting the balloon through it and through it and through it. Finally, would have enough helium that cut the whole thing loose, and it'd take off, screaming up, and pick up this capsule right along with it and go. And like I said, he did 2 of these flights from Sioux Falls. Here's a picture of Nick up close, getting ready to go. If you look at his helmet here, the mask, you would come down and it would close and seal. And they figured this is where he had the failure. I guess it was kind of common for pilots using this system for their mask to fog over. And I guess they could quick open it up and then shut it again. But it would, by opening it real quick, they could get the fog out of it. And they figured that's what happened to him. But when he tried to reclose it, it wouldn't reclose. But here he is taking off. So here's the whole balloon. This is the parachute right here. It's part of the assembly, and it's between the balloon and the capsule. And this is when they sever it, they'd sever it right here. The balloon would go off by itself, and then this parachute would drop and take the capsule along down with it. This is not the parachute that the individual had. Here's what their world looks like from a balloon at 123,000 feet or somewhere right or close to that. And when he came down, he was completely unconscious. He had been without oxygen for a while. He landed near Worthington, Minnesota. And this isn't the most pleasant picture to look at, but the reason I have it in here is here's a person that worked for the EMTs and the ambulance. His name is Kent Morstead. Remember Kent from Sioux Falls, Miller Funeral Home? At that point, he was working for the hospital in Worthington, and he was there when they recovered him. So I just thought that part was kind of interesting. And here's a book about the whole thing, A Magnificent Failure. And this book has a lot of stuff about Sioux Falls in it and all the things going on during this time with involvement with Nick Piantanida. Now here's where the little interesting part where it all ties together comes in. I want you to pay attention to this part. Here's your County Historical Society monument. Very nice monument, by the way. It's on the south side of the Sioux Falls Airport on, I have a hard time with the name straight, Eloquin or something like that. But it's on the, right on the south side of the airport. And nice plaque. It's wrong. It says that he dreamed of recapturing the free fall record from the Soviet Union and made 3 attempts to do so. And it talks about the Russian Eugene, whatever his name is, leaped from 83,500 feet. I think he did this back in like 1956, 58. And it says that he was trying to break this Russian's record. He wasn't. He was trying to break Joe Kittinger's record. And there's a lot of history of that. And like I said, Joe Kittinger and the U.S. Air Force wanted to have nothing to do with him at all. But so nice monument. The information on it is wrong. After this, the big thing in ballooning was trying to cross the Atlantic Ocean. And these attempts went on for a while. Quite a few flights, 5 lives were lost in attempts trying to make it across the Atlantic. Some of the balloons were built by Raven in Sioux Falls. Ed Yost made the last 5 balloons, or balloons for the last 5 attempts. And he did the first one himself. And Ed almost made it. He got just within a couple 100 miles of Portugal, and then the winds turned and he just couldn't do it. And he did this all solo. So that was 1976. 1978, the Atlantic was crossed in a balloon built by Ed Yost. And then again, Joe Kittinger did it in 1984 in a Yost balloon as well, and Joe did it solo. So the first balloons to make it across the Atlantic Ocean Sioux Falls. Well, it really wasn't Sioux Falls at that point. It was T, South Dakota. Ed was making them out of T, South Dakota, but still here. And here's National Geographic Ed Yost's attempt. And like I said, he did it in 1976. He built a T, flew 2,474 miles. And this is 1976. This record still stands for the longest flight in a gas balloon for that size balloon. They go by volume. And this was kind of a small balloon, but that record still stands today for the longest flight. And here's a picture of Ed Yost, and this is Jerry Melcha, just getting ready to launch. They took off in Maine. And for a gondola, he built a boat, good thing, landed in the Atlantic and was picked up and by a German trawler. And he brought him to the Mount of Gibraltar where they dropped him off. So here he's being pulled to shore. And then the team that did make it in 1978, here's their National Geographic story. And they landed in France, and they were international heroes. And then after the Atlantic came trying to fly around the world in a balloon, and these attempts started in the 80s, and Raven's Industries supplied both balloons and engineering for several attempts that weren't successful. And one of the attempts, not by one of Raven balloons, but a serious attempt by a gentleman named Steve Fawcett, took off from the Stratable, and I was there for that. And this was Steve's first attempt around the world. And this flight was not successful, but he made, 5 attempts and finally made it on his 5th attempt. Here he is in the bottom of the Stratable getting ready to launch. Again, at the bottom of the Stratable. And here's his capsule, again, in the Air and Space Museum. So, you know, and that's me, by the way. And here's a book about 2 attempts about balloons that were made by Raven. This balloon had to do with Baron Hilton from Hilton Hotels. And this one was an attempt done by Malcolm Forbes. Neither one were successful. Then after that, at that point, only hot air balloons were being flown in the United States for all practical purposes. But in Europe, they were flying sport gas balloons, flying off hydrogen, but virtually nothing in the United States. Well, Ed Yost revived gas ballooning in the United States. And some of these balloons here were built by Yost. And he built these balloons out at T, South Dakota. But he got gas ballooning going again. Gas ballooning is extremely expensive, very, very expensive per flight, thousands of dollars per flight to inflate one of these. And here is Ed Yost's factory. These 2 buildings right here on the east side of T is where he was manufacturing the balloons. It's kind of hard to imagine, but balloons going across the Atlantic, these sport balloons, everything. This is where he was making them at. World record attempts. I've been involved with about 10 world record attempts, 11, I guess. And a lot of these attempts come out of the Midwest here, usually out of North Dakota. We need very cold temperatures, usually depending what kind of attempt we're doing, and very wide open spaces. And North Dakota usually wins. But this is a Raven balloon here. A gentleman in Sioux Falls named John Koba did set a world record quite a ways back in one of these balloons too. And then in 2012, there was a massive coverage on TV about a person that wanted to break Joe Kittinger's record. And he did. It was about a $40 million attempt. And he jumped from 128,000 feet and was successful. This was sponsored by Red Bull drink. And Raven built the balloon. And this balloon was 29.5 million cubic feet in volume. Think of that. And that's helium. So the amount of lift that this thing had was enormous, but it takes that big of a balloon to get that high in the altitude. And here it shows a nice little comparison to the Statue of Liberty to give you an idea of the magnitude of the size of these things. And then after that, I've just got some stuff about Aerostar being a division of Raven, being a world leading innovator and manufacturer of hot air balloons in its day. They don't make balloons anymore, by the way, but they still, their balloons, even though they haven't been built for years, or many of them are still around, still considered some of the best equipment in the world. But here I just thought I'd show you what a modern hot air balloon equipment looks like today. So here's one of my sets of burners, and each one of these burners is about 16 million BTUs of heat, so a total output of about 32 million. This is, this is inside one of my balloon trailers, but it's how we transport it. But here's our basket. Remember that chair that they were sitting on? Well, this basket has lay down seats in it, very, very comfortable, quite large. This is the envelope. This is our structure that carries, that goes above the basket. Here's my inflator fans. Remember that little bitty fan we saw in that picture in England when we're going to do the English channel? This is what I use. Here's our instrumentation, all digital. This one tells us our altitude. This is our main instrument. It tells me our altitude, temperature at the hot air balloon at the top, and how fast we're rising and falling. This is a GPS I just like to carry as well. Carry it around my neck. Tells me my speed and my heading, what direction I'm going, which sometimes just a couple of degrees can make a difference. Here's our radios we use. This is a 50-watt private band FM, which is in the vehicle. This is my FM I carry on me to talk back and forth to this one in the vehicle. And this is an aircraft radio, so I can talk to the tower. And just a quick photo gallery. Here we were flying over Mount Rushmore. I had a contract from Radio City Music Hall to have balloons fly over Mount Rushmore at the 50th anniversary dedication of Mount Rushmore. And President Bush was there. It was a huge celebration. A couple more of our balloons. That one too. This was Dwayne Walk. Many of you might recognize that name. Just some general pictures. This is Albuquerque, the largest balloon festival in the world, except for this year when it didn't happen, first time ever. Again, Albuquerque. And here's a picture from Inner Mongolia when I flew there. And this is the balloon I was flying. Very large, very heavy. It takes a lot to fly that stuff. And that's the end. So, Rick, you're up.
Okay, well, that was a great presentation, and we really appreciate you taking the time. I don't know if we mentioned it before, but Orv was coming to us. Orv was coming to us from Arizona, and in his winter home down there. And we really appreciate having there. We appreciate everybody coming online tonight. This was a kind of a big experiment for us. We've had a couple of glitches. But overall, I think it went pretty well. I just want to remind you that we're going to give it another go next month on December 17th. We're going to bring once again Will Prines as he brings some of his memories of his days at the Pomp Room. Will Prines is a member of the South Dakota Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and not only is he going to give us some historical and remembrances of his time, performing down at the Pomp Room, but he's also going to perform for us from his studio in here in Sioux Falls. So once again, thanks again, Orv, for a great presentation. Thank you all for being here tonight, and we hope to see you again next month.